hearing a lot about that word right now, and I think there are many different definitions. But as we think about it, it connects to the Greek word stem author. So really thinking about authoring our own lives, being intentional. I think it is around alignment of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So a congruence there between what we say and what we do. And when the people that are following us see that, I think that's when trust starts to be built. I think authenticity is a way of being rather than doing. So kind of a mindset and a certain presence is part of that way of being. So thinking about it being externally driven versus internally driven, and we'll kind of contrast the differences there. Well, leaders can't accomplish their missions alone. They need other people to follow. And the way that people tend to follow and want to really step up and step in with a leader is to know someone and really then trust them. So I think it's really imperative that leaders, know themselves and then really share who they are with those that they're leading. Bill George, who was the former CEO of Medtronic, after his stint with Medtronic, he has done a lot of business study around leadership of who really makes the best leader and what are the characteristics or what is the profile of the perfect leader. And what he's really found in looking at over 1,000 studies around this is that there is no perfect profile. We are not born great leaders. Leaders become great through really understanding their lives, through living their lives, testing themselves in the real experience of life. And that includes the rough spots. It includes their struggles, the failures, as well as the triumphs. He did his own study with 125 leaders who were really considered to be great leaders. And that was the thing they had in common, is that they all had really reflected on their life experience and who they had become. They really understood the values that they now stand for and how those were formed. And they're very much willing to share that with others. Again, an example of that authentic sharing. So that tends to be the kind of leader who is successful. It tends to be the kind of leader that people are willing to jump in with and even struggle, for common goals. Yeah, so back to the Kevin Cashman book, he uses the words persona-driven versus authentic self-driven. And so if we look at persona, that's more that external driver, kind of our external personality, or us wanting to really promote and protect an image. We're very much, if we're persona-driven, we're very much interested in having approval and paying attention to how we're seen and really looking good. There's very much an element of protecting, kind of inward, having a little shield around us, and using persona to cope, just to get through the difficulties of leading. Whereas authentic leadership is more internally driven. It's more driven by the things we really hold to be key, our values, our purpose as that evolves for us through our experiences, and then what then becomes our vision for leading. So it's really much more our core, who we truly are, who we intend to be, and who we're choosing to be. So we'll use these illustrations to kind of look at differences and effects of leading from mostly persona versus mostly authentic self. So in this scenario, the authentic self is here, but it's quite small, and we see this huge persona. Kind of think of it as a shell or a membrane around that leader. And so people might not know who this person really is, what they really stand for, their vision for leading and vision for the team. And then it works in the opposite direction as well. This is so thick again that the leader doesn't get any input from the outside. It's hard to get that through. It's hard to get ideas or input or even help. And when that's not coming through, the leader is pretty much alone here. And also not being impressed or imprinted by anything outside of themselves. So it's a pretty lonely place, actually, for a leader with this very huge shell around them. Whereas if we look here, authentic self is larger, and this would be an indication that people actually know that person more, that this is not as hard to get through. So more understanding of who this leader is, what they really stand for, what they envision for their team. And then also it's easier for that leader then to really get input and to really listen and hear the ideas and accept the help of those around them. So a lot more learning and a lot more ideas are being shared here. And this leader probably has more people around them and more people to help them reach their mission. So the goal of the internal driver, the authentic self, I think, is to make a difference in their leading and in life. Whereas here, a lot of the focus is put on looking good, again, protecting that image. Leading from authentic self, those kind of leaders tend to be very self-aware. They know their strengths. They also are very aware of their shortcomings. They know when they've made a mistake, and they're willing to admit that. Whereas if we're all about image, we're not going to want to expose those blind spots. We're not going to look for them. Probably that means we're not asking for a lot of feedback, and we won't be admitting things when we know that perhaps we've made a mistake. Another characteristic on this side is courage. I always think of courage linking with vulnerability and risk. And I always think of the physicians who work with Doctors Without Borders, that they could choose a safer, easier path for what they know, and instead they've chosen to really be vulnerable and really take risks and really act in their professions out of a very courageous spot, I think. And so this is a little bit more fear-driven, a little more let's keep it safe, let's take a little bit easier route here than this very courageous risk-taking position. A couple other things. One is groundedness. And I think people who lead from their authentic selves tend to be people that we get a sense of being grounded, kind of centered, comfortable in their own skin. And we know when someone is, and we also know when someone feels uneasy in their own skin. So this leadership is much more of an uneasy presence. So rather than self-awareness, it's much more self-consciousness on this side. And then another important one that we'll mention right now is this concept that we'll talk about in the whole of the year of leader as knower or leader as learner. And what are we modeling? So leaders get paid a lot for being knowers. They're rewarded for that. So it's very hard sometimes to say, okay, but I also am a learner, and I won't have all the answers. Somebody who's leading from this side tends to have an easier time admitting when they don't know and really being curious and leading others into a discovery and really modeling that learning organization. Whereas someone on this side, again, because of that image and approval, it's going to be very difficult for them to show up as a learner who doesn't know everything. And in our super fast moving culture now, the leader won't know everything. And they really have to know how to ask the right questions to lead their group through, but they also have to know that it will be impossible for them to know everything. So as we said, we will always have both drivers, external and internal, but what we're trying to go for is to increase this as our internal driver, and so that we're more driven by authentic self than persona. So there are some practices that you're now going to hear about that really are the behaviors, the looks like, sounds like in the real day-to-day of your leading. and we'll delve into how those fit into your leading.